All right, so I had a lot of trouble trying to figure out how to talk about conditioning to this. I'm still trying to figure out what the group wants as far as information building the machine. Since I've been talking about like training and writing about training for 10, 15 years, it's like I've always been not a proponent of just handing out programs because we're all a little different. Even like the programs I wrote for Matt that I had to take, it's going to be different for everybody, right? Just because we're all different. So that's why I don't like a cookie cutter program, be like, hey, here you go. I always believed in educating people about like how the body works so we can understand why we're doing things. And I looked at my wife, I was like, I don't know what to do to talk about conditioning, right? Because most of us think that conditioning is we just run ourselves into the ground or we do hard things, which is kind of misguided, and we'll talk about that. So let's go ahead and get started with the presentation. There's only 2 of you, but if you guys have questions, ask them as we go. I usually wait to the end. Some of this stuff can be, I'm trying to make the physiology of the body really, really exciting and sexy. And I know it can be hard too, but I get excited about it. So hopefully my excitement will get everybody else excited. There we go. All right. I think for most people in the group, this will be pretty helpful. All right. Okay, just my reminder, I am not a doctor. All right.
Basically a doctor.
Just a guy who's read a lot, studied a lot, and have been doing this for way too long. And the other thing is, we're not going to really talk about this, but your environment. If you're having trouble getting your environment in, work with one of our member coaches, such as myself, so we can work together to build an environment to help you build the life and universe that you envision. Now, the goals for this talk is for you to walk away with a better understanding of how your body works. Nobody ever explains to us, like, no one gives us an owner's manual to our body. And then we look to doctors and Instagram and other people to tell us like how our body's supposed to work. I think by knowing and understanding how your body works is very empowering, and it'll help you become almost your own coach. And I think that can be very beneficial here when you know what your body's doing, when it's doing it, and why your body might not be doing what it's supposed to be doing. So oftentimes with conditioning, or I'm going to use like more of endurance training, to me, everything is conditioning. Sean, you taking a walk, that's conditioning. You lifting weights, that's conditioning. So we're going to talk about more of endurance. Okay. We're going to talk about in endurance, and I think it should be strength and endurance training, not conditioning. Okay. So what most people do for conditioning is they go as hard as they can for as long as they can. And for me, that is just a misguided method for enhancing endurance, because we have to remember we get strong in the positions that we train, and that the type of training determines the type of adaptations that we're trying to induce, right? Everything in training is so we can adapt to do bigger and better things. So this goes into what I was kind of saying in the beginning. Blindly following any training scheme without understanding the underlying principles can potentially be a handicap, if not undermine your performance. That's because a program that's typically like the one I shared in the group about like how to do a hybrid style of strength and running, I think it is a very good program because you can apply it to anybody. You can plug in what your event is and you can like manipulate your times. But if you follow, this was back in the day when we had muscle and fitness magazines, you'd follow the bodybuilder's routine, but that was his routine, not someone that might be best for like me as a 15-year-old, right? So if you understand the principles and like how our body works, we can actually improve our performance dramatically. So our industry likes to think that there's recipes for everybody. There is no single recipe for maximizing your fitness, right? So understanding what to do and when to do it is going to be the first thing to understanding how to train, right? So we need to know what we're training for, so then we know what stimulus to apply to achieve the results we're looking for. We are very complex. The body has 11 different systems that work together to keep us alive. And when we think about recovery, we usually just think about the muscles, right? But we also have to think about hormones and the endocrine system. We have to think about the nervous system. We have to think about the cardiovascular system, the skeletal system, even the digestive system. These all have to adapt in order for us to improve that what we're trying to work towards, right? So we have to keep that in mind, is that the adaptation for the muscles might be quicker than the adaptation for maybe the nervous system or for the heart or for your bones. So everything's got to take time. And this is everybody's, well, we're all humans, we're all different because we do have genetics. But I will say it, there is a fancy thing called epigenetics, which is the environment actually will dictate how and when your genes are expressed. So they say that your genetics are the bullet in the gun, but your environment's the trigger. So when it comes to conditioning or endurance training, we have to look at evolution and how our body used to be, how we got to where we are today. So when the hunter and gatherers, they went long periods without food. So they basically, their diets were, they would go hunt to get their animal protein and fat, but then they would have long periods of no food. Right, so they became what's called fat adapted. It's low intensity work, and they had to use the fat because fat has higher caloric content. So it was more conducive for what they were doing, because I think the human body can hold like 100,000 calories worth of fat compared to only 2,000 calories worth of carb, which is part of the reason we have an obesity problem. We can just blame evolution, but we have to look at, we were meant to have those low intensity periods or aerobic work with quick bursts during the chase. So one of the thoughts with evolution is that we were able to tire animals out because we had high aerobic capacities, but we also had the ability to sprint on demand. So we would just wear animals into the ground. So it's just something to think about. And so the goal of endurance training is to improve your ability to do whatever it is you want to do for an extended period of time. Most of us just train and lift weights. So for you, aerobic capacity work is pretty much all we need, because we'll talk about that there at the end. But for some of you, you're running half marathons, 50Ks, trail races, biking, like we can maximize our endurance with some strategic work in understanding our energy systems. Right. So endurance is simply just the maximum sustainable work rate you can maintain for the duration of an event before fatigue sets in. Right. Fatigue limits endurance, and all fatigue is you don't have the energy to do what you need to do anymore. You're tired. Your body's like, I'm out. All right. Fatigue is caused by three things. It's your body's inability to meet the energy demands. It's a depletion or an accumulation of certain metabolites, or it's a reduction in motor nerve signal. So that gives us the answer how to make ourselves a little bit more fatigue resistant. We have to improve our body's ability to meet the energy demands of the task at hand. We have to not allow our body to deplete certain metabolites, and we have to improve our ability to get rid of the accumulation of certain metabolites. And reduction in motor nerve signal, that's just improving your endurance so you can continuously do something. All right, so energy, what is energy? I think energy is a weird thing because it can be hard to conceptualize, but the definition is it's the strength and vitality required for sustained physical or mental activity. Like, okay, what does that even mean for what we're talking about? So something to keep in mind is, so energy is just, it makes things do things, right? It's the fire going on outside. It's, when it comes to our food, we'll talk about that here. It's electricity. It's just, we take energy and the law of conservation of energy states that it converts forms, right? So the fan in front of me, we're taking electricity to turn these fan blades, which is creating like this energy coming at me. It can't be created or destroyed. It just changes states, right? So the question is, how does the body even make energy for endurance training? So it's our metabolism. This is people don't understand what metabolism is. All it is it's the chemical reactions to keep you alive. So when people are like, oh, my metabolism's slow, and you're like, oh, what is your metabolism? They're like, well, I don't know, right? You can't, if your metabolism's slow, it typically means your lifestyle is slow, your environment's slow, okay? your metabolism is just a byproduct of your environment. Now, yes, there can be medical conditions which can cause your metabolism to be slower, I guess. But one of the main components of our metabolism is the conversion of the energy in our food to energy to run all the cellular processes in our bodies. So, and that's known as cellular respiration. So we take food and then we convert it into what's known as ATP, right? So those of you who are watching this later, don't like panic when you see this high school biology, these words. I'm going to make this exciting. ATP is the energy currency of the body. It's everything that we need to run and move, and me do this with my hands and talk and my eyes, reading the words. ATP is involved with getting my body to do that, right? Here's a very simple picture of what cellular respiration is. We get glucose, we add oxygen, it enters the cell, it goes into the mitochondria, we have ATP, and then a byproduct is CO2 and H2O. I'm going to mention CO2 now because it's going to come up in the breathing, in the physiological and breathing and how we can manage our state. Is CO2 is a byproduct of cellular respiration. And I'm going to come back to it in a minute. So just keep CO2 in your mind, CO2, 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 because when we talk about breathing, we will tie in endurance training. All right, so yep, we just talked about that. So I want to say this before we talk about our metabolic system, is that it's very complex. All right, and I'm going to try and make it as simple as possible. You don't need to know all the steps, but having a basic understanding of like these systems within the body is going to help you. I don't know. I think it's amazing. It's truly a beautiful system that is continually evolved, and we are highly adaptable. You know, Johan's, I think, is a perfect example. He was a tactical athlete in the military, and then I'm not sure his timeline, but then he did marathon running training, and then he became a power lifter, and then he became a bodybuilder. So the body's highly adaptable. These metabolic systems will be able to do whatever it is you want them to do. You just have to essentially convince your body that you're serious about doing it, and it'll change. Yeah, don't care. All right, so here's kind of like a simple way of looking at like how our body can like make energy from proteins, carbs, and fats. The body's preferred sources of fuel is going to depend on the type of activity you are in. Endurance athletes are going to be better off. I'm not saying that the carbs aren't important, but fats provide more energy. So endurance athletes are usually more fat adapted. And then your power sports, not powerlifting, but like field sports, are going to prefer carbohydrates, because you'll see here why in a minute. But the end result, again, is the waste byproduct of CO2 and water, and then we get energy and ATP. We can use protein, but we don't want to use protein is used for building things. We want to use protein for what it's needed for, not for energy. All right. Okay, so the goal is to build adenosine triphosphate. So these three pink things here, these are phosphate groups. Tri meaning three, and that means three phosphates. So there's three pink ones, and then here's your adenosine molecules. The energy comes from when we break these chemical bonds. So there's this line right here between this pink and this red. When it breaks, it creates energy, and it converts it from chemical to thermal, or chemical to whatever is needed for within the body. Yep, so energy released when an ATP molecule's chemical bonds are broken is what powers all functions of cell, every cell, nervous system, muscles, our tendons, our cartilage, our vision, just our digestive, everything needs ATP, not just muscles, okay? Your body does not give a shit about your PRs. It doesn't care about, it just wants to keep you alive. So its first goal is to take all the ATP that it needs to keep you alive. They call this like your base metabolic rate, the cellular reactions that your body needs to keep you alive. Then we can worry about your PRs and things like that. But if you don't have everything else in order, and the ATP and the energy in order to keep the body alive, it's not going to help you achieve the things you're training for. So that's where rest comes into play. Recovery, nutrition, and other things such as that. So we will rely on two metabolic pathways to create ATP. Yes, we have three energy systems, but we only rely on two of them to create the ATP that we need to meet our energy demands. Okay. Each of those pathways can change its rate or the way the amount it needs of ATP to make up to its maximum capacity. Okay, so both of those pathways have a maximum capacity, and the capacity is what we aim to increase with our training. All right, so you have this orange. So all muscles have ATP in storage, and they're good for about 2 seconds. So if you need to do something fast and quick, like your body will break down that ATP so those muscles can contract very fast. Very short life though. So that's when it'll kick into one of the 3 energy systems. And the first one will be an anaerobic or ATP PC, which we'll talk about. It's very short. This is for anything lasting under 15 seconds. Depends on which textbook you read. Some will say 10, some will say 20. We'll pick 15. It's nice in the middle, right? So that first one is what we call the ATP PC. When ATP breaks down, we talked about that bond breaks, it becomes what's known as ADP, or adenosine diphosphate. We went from tri, 3, to di, 2. What the body will then do is take creatine phosphate, and it takes the phosphate from the creatine phosphate and puts it back onto the adenosine diphosphate to make ATP. All right, so the picture here in the corner, we have the 3 phosphates, one comes off. We have creatine phosphate in the muscle. This breaks off and attaches back up to make ATP. We have very limited amounts of this. This is the, oh shit, I need to get the fuck out of here now energy system, right? Or a 100-meter dash. Depends on what you're working for, right? Higher intensities, no oxygen is needed. But this ATP comes from the second system, which is anaerobic glycolysis. Fancy word for meaning anaerobic means without oxygen. Glycolysis means to lyse or cut in half glucose. Okay. Carbohydrates are the main fuel source for this. No oxygen is needed. ATP demand is high and exceeds what can be supplied by our aerobic system, which we'll talk about next. Here's the thing. It takes like 4 ATP to get 2 ATP out of this system, right? So it's not conducive to long-term types of events. So any of you running 5Ks, 13.1s, 26.2s, or 50Ks, we don't want to rely on this. Most people train this when they think of conditioning. They go really hard, really fast, every day till it can no longer move. But we only get a net yield of 2 ATP. It's not a good long-term, right? So if you're trying to do long-term endurance events, we don't always want to train this, all right? Aerobic, to me, this is the most important energy system, all right? So if we look back here on this anaerobic system, this end product is called pyruvate. Don't worry about the name, but that is the end product, is the 2 ADP and the pyruvate. Your aerobic system uses this and or fat to produce ATP, but it needs oxygen for all these to go. It has 4 stages, and it needs oxygen for these systems to work, okay? That's why we breathe oxygen, right? Our body needs oxygen to produce energy. This is for our lower intensity, long duration. What you guys are doing right now, sitting there breathing, is aerobic energy systems. We get anywhere from 36 to 38 ATP yield. That is much better than 2. So if we're trying to do long distance endurance type stuff, this is the system that's going to power that. The thing is this is the most boring training for most of you, because nobody wants to sit for 30 minutes or 60 minutes or 90 minutes a day running, biking at low intensity. It can be very boring and monotonous. But if you guys watch what Matt does on the bike, every day it's this low intensity, long duration type of aerobic work. This is what we need for any type of endurance work. All right. So anaerobic, no oxygen, uses carbs, byproduct is pyruvate. That pyruvate then can enter into aerobic metabolism. Okay. There we go. See, CO2 is another byproduct again. CO2. All right. So pyruvate is the end result of anaerobic metabolism. It can take 2 roads, right? So it can enter our cells into the mitochondria, which you guys are like, oh shit, 10th grade biology. Mitochondria is just what makes the energy. It's what makes ATP. It can either go into the mitochondria or it can linger outside of the mitochondria and be converted into lactic acid and quickly into lactate and hydrogen ions, right? What we want it to do if your goal is endurance or conditioning is we need it to enter into the mitochondria. What determines this fate is oxygen present and the number of the mitochondria available to take up and utilize it. Slow twitch fibers. So we have two types of muscle fibers. Slow twitch is for slower activities. Fast twitch is for faster activities. Typically, this is more by most of our age has already been set in. We have what we have and we have to work with it. It's usually more influenced when we're younger and our nervous system is developing. So like if you guys are thinking about having kids and you want them to be fast, don't have them run cross country, right? Have them do fast type sports. Fast twitch fibers have very little energy production cells, very little mitochondria. Slow twitch is where they all have to be. So we need to provide a nice balance. CO2 tolerance again, don't care. So when it comes to training, we can manipulate our metabolism's role in endurance through training. And this makes endurance a metabolic quality. Okay? So lactic acid. So lactic acid doesn't cause DOMS or delayed onset muscle soreness. Lactic acid is just I don't know if you guys remember back in the day, the coach would be like, oh, that's the lactic acid making you tired, right? Kind of. Lactic acid forms when pyruvate hangs around and does not enter into the metabolism. Remember, we fatigue for one of three reasons. This is one of them, is when lactic acid hangs around. If the pyruvate production, if we can't get rid of it, if it can't enter into the mitochondria, and when the pyruvate production exceeds its removal, this is what's known as lactate threshold, and this is trainable. Okay? There's two ways we can change this. One is reduce the production of lactate. All right. We do this by maximizing aerobic capacity, right? More slow twitch, more low intensity, more mitochondria to produce that slow duration energy. It'll suck all that pyruvate up and convert it into ATP. Right. So we actually have something called, there is a thing called aerobic deficiency syndrome. And we see this much with like the high intensity training. And the only cure for this really is high volume of low intensity training that we were talking about earlier. The second way we can get rid of it is to increase the rate of lactate removal from the working muscles. Right. We don't need to go deeper in that. So I want you to think of slow twitch muscle fibers like a vacuum that sucks pyruvate up, right? So the bigger and stronger your vacuum, the more higher intensity work that you can do, and the more power and speed an athlete can produce for longer. And I'm going to give some examples of this, right? So the bigger the motor, the more anaerobic work you can handle. All right, so we're going to stop there. I know that's a lot. People might want to go back and like take notes, or we can have discussions about it. So how does this work pertain to like powerlifting, right? So your training, so stuff you're doing in the gym is typically going to be in an anaerobic type things. They don't last longer than 15 seconds. Some of the people that do like 1 to 2 minute sets, right? We have to replenish the ATP that we used up for those movements. It's going to come from the aerobic system. If your aerobic system's garbage, you're going to get fatigued quicker when you're doing your training. So if you want to train longer or have higher intensities, building a larger motor or aerobic base is going to replenish our ATP storages quicker and more efficiently. It's also going to help more with recovery. So think about like field sports, like football, right? They're all out for 10 seconds, but then they have incomplete recovery. They get 30 seconds in between plays, so their body never actually fully recovers. So we need the aerobic system. So the bigger the aerobic system is, the quicker football players or any other athlete can recover in between like their little bursts. Soccer is the same way. Every field sport is just about the same thing. There's short bursts with incomplete recovery. We need the aerobic system to, if we can get the body to click over from anaerobic to aerobic quicker, you're going to be able to go longer. Now, saying that, the body just doesn't, oh, we're going to flip that one off and turn this energy system on. Oh, we're going to flip that one off. Turn that. They're all kind of working together depending on what you're doing. All right, that was a lot. But ATP, 3 energy systems, our body just needs energy to do shit. If the biggest take home point after all this, if you're like, what the fuck was all that? What's this pyruvate thing? What's this lactic acid? Build the aerobic base. Just do aerobic work. Low intensity, zone 1, zone 2. I'm going to talk about how to program for it in a couple weeks. Zone 2 is about 60 to 70% of your max heart rate. Don't know what your max heart rate is. It's like 220 minus your age if you need a quick like calculation of that, and then to do 60%. My usual thing is it should just be nasal breathing. Maximize how fast you're going so you can only breathe through your nose. If you have to open your mouth, you're going a little too fast, you're probably in a zone 3. And the most of your training for endurance work should be aerobic based. It's slow, it's long duration, but if you're trying to compete in these long events, just do the low intensity to moderate intensity. That's the only way. You need to build the engine and the base and the motor. Otherwise, you're going to tank quick. Because you want to use the anaerobic, the short burst duration when you need it. Maybe I'm climbing down a hill. Maybe I need to catch up to the guy in front of me. But once you've gotten there, then you can coast a little bit, right? So we talk about like everyone's, oh, mash the gas, mash the gas. Well, sometimes you got to remember what makes a car fast is the brakes. It's knowing when to let off the gas. It's knowing when to mash the gas. It's knowing when to coast, right? That's how our body, if we're talking the body as being a machine, if we're all gas all the time, then we're going to fatigue and get tired quicker. So we need to know when to mash, when to back off, when to coast, when to brake. That's all I got. Questions, comments, concerns?
So when it comes to I guess increasing maybe the gas tank might be the good idea to use here. Would you say, because you said you can do like for example, like the 60 minutes or longer durations of just like steady state cardio, would that be potentially a better equivalent as opposed to like having, like for instance, I work a very active job, so like I'm constantly going between like a more slower paced heart rate to like a slightly elevated heart rate all throughout the day where I am physically active. But I've never been somebody who's like supplemented with outside cardiovascular work. I've never felt the need to because I've always felt like I had a somewhat decent baseline of aerobic conditioning. Do you think like continued strides of just like throughout the day would lead to a decent amount of conditioning? Because for me it might, but that's just my personal preference, right? Versus like committing an hour or an hour and a half to constant nonstop steady state. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
In terms of like improving the conditioning of the tank, I guess.
So yeah, so the gas tank for the body is going to be the aerobic system. I always look like it as aerobics, the gas tank, and then the anaerobic is like the engine. We can go from like a V8 to a V12 to whatever. The bigger the tank, the more fuel we have to do what we need to do. It's going to come down to the individual. What are we trying to do? So what are you training for? What do you need? Conditioned to do what? If you don't feel fatigued at your job and you don't feel fatigued during your training and you're sleeping and recovering well, you don't need to do much aerobic work. The aerobic system has a 4 to 6 week like residual adaptations. So you can train your aerobic system and then not train it for 4 to 6 weeks and you'd still be at the same place you were like 4 to 6 weeks ago. So when it comes to like lifters are notorious for not doing aerobic work. So we always do an aerobic block first, a GPP block. Then we revisit GPP every 4 to 6 weeks on our like down week, just to keep the tank where it needs to be. Now, aerobic work does not have to be running, biking, rowing. You can do it lifting. So with my athletes, I don't want them to run. So how can we build their aerobic capacity? We do it with lifting. We do it in the gym. We do it with sled drags. We do it like you can take 60% of your 1 rep max in your squat, bench, and deadlift and just cycle through those movements for 30 minutes and just get your heart rate. Anything that gets the heart rate up is aerobic work. So you can do it in your training. Many people think aerobic work just needs to be running. You can do it in the gym. And I think you can do it with like crawling, movement, climbing, like other activities. It doesn't have to be limited to just like a stationary bike in the gym. It can be whatever you want it to be. Anything that gets the heart rate up for a prolonged period of time is aerobic work. As long as you stay in that 60 to 70% zone for a long time. But again, it comes down to conditions for what? And then also the health benefits for the heart and lungs, but who's here for that?
Okay, cool.
But
Yeah,
I
that
also
was
think
kind
we're
of my main-
evolving as creatures, though. We're no longer, this is the what's the naturalistic fallacy where we say what they used to do is how we should live now. We're also adapting as creatures, right? We don't live in caves. We don't have to go long times without it, but we might need to, but we don't. So, how's the body adapting? What's the lifestyle you're living? What's the universe you want to live in? Where do you want to be in the next 3 to 5 years? Because building a big aerobic base takes a long time. And that's why people hate doing it. It's boring. I think that you're sadistic if you like the long, I don't know, the long form cardio is just, I like hiking. I like doing shit. Like I trail ran for a while. I would like to get back into it. But even fighters, right? Think about like a jujitsu fighter. They got to have a big tank. Because most of that time, like you look at those expert fighters, man, that's all aerobic work. But then the anaerobic system kicks in when they go for a takedown. And then they got to relax a little bit. And then the anaerobic system kicks in. So you just think any sport needs a big tank, in my opinion. Not too big, but your off season should be mostly, 30 minutes on the bike a couple of times a week. So like the team programming we're doing for 1612, it's aerobic work like 2-3 times a week. You can do whatever the hell you want for 20, 30 minutes. It's just cardio of choice, right? It's good for the heart.
I like that. Okay.
Just do shit you like. Go play for 30 minutes. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's what, as an adult, like just watching my kid move, like, yeah, that gets your heart rate up, polishing your wood.
Well, the chopping before I polish is what really gets my heart rate up. You know what I mean? Just the constant back and forth fucking movement.
Yeah. So yeah, that's just what I mean. They just find shit you love doing. Like, I don't know. I was at the gym today. I had a client and they're running on the treadmill. It's 90 degrees outside. Why don't you go outside? Go on the trails. Why are you running on a treadmill inside? I don't understand it. I'll never understand that.
It's hot outside.
It's hot in the gym too.
90 degrees sounds nice.
Oh, I did. The humidity here is pretty brutal today. I can take heat, but I don't know. I sound like a Midwesterner. So humidity is what gets me the most.
No, humidity's trash, dude.
It's worse.
Yeah, humidity is why I never want to go back to Florida.
Oh, it's just thick air here. Like I have the air conditioning on and I'm like sweating.
I think as being from South Texas, I'm just kind of used to like being like feeling like I'm in a constant like wetsuit.
Yeah.
That's just like my day to day.
You live in a mountain.
No.
Dude,
Yeah,
you live
I'm
in a
okay with that. That's the best
that
place
is
to
where
be.
you are.
Have you felt the inside of your mouth? It is very comfy. Walls are soft. 10 out of 10.
Nice and moist. Warm and moist.
Lubrication to date.
Sean, how was that taught? Was that too much? Is that just enough?
Nah.
You're a coach.
Yeah, that basically is the conversation that if someone really wants a more in-depth version of or talk on conditioning, it's what I'll basically run them through.
Yeah, and I think if we just understand our energy systems, then we can kind of get like a better idea of like what our coach is programming for us too. Like when you look at a program, you're like, oh, and I always want my clients to ask me why I do things because it keeps me on my heels. Instead of you do what I say to do. But even like the programs I wrote for Matt and like the 1612, like I take those all into consideration as just like what majority of people need, but we're all going to have different results from things because our bodies are all different. Or the fiber
bodies
types
are different, environment's different,
genetics are different, fiber types are different, like it's all different. But you can train, but that's what something Matt always talks about is like if you're doing endurance events, like he doesn't go in with expectations. Like he just trains for it and then he goes and competes and has fun. He's only competing with himself. I don't think most of us in here are going to be world-class endurance runners. So just be okay.
You don't know what I can do.
You're right. But you could still compete.
Those walks are there for a reason.
Yeah, you're good at walking. Good for you. Cool. I think we'll do the breathing and physiology talk next week because we talked about CO2 this week. Just a little teaser. We're going to talk about CO2 tolerance. CO2 is actually what tells the red blood cells to offload oxygen to be used for energy. I'll say that again. CO2, which is a waste product, is actually what accumulates in our blood. And when red blood cells come by, it's what tells the red blood cells to release oxygen to the working tissues. So we can leverage that to increase our tolerance for CO2 to decrease or increase our resistance to fatigue. It's all connected. All of it's important. This is why people pay people like me to do this shit. Because it is. I love this shit. And I truly love it. And that's why people, I don't want to think about this. Like, just tell me what to do. But it's also what's wrong with our profession, because people can get like a weekend certification and now they're a coach, and it's marketing too, right, Sean? You see it.
100%.
It's fucking brutal.
100%.
Anybody can coach people, and everybody can be a coach, though. You know.
Well, it's the thing, like, right? Like, because someone's strong, just because someone's strong doesn't make them a coach. They're just good at being strong. Doesn't mean they know how. Like, again, like coaching is the conversations in between the sets and reps. Getting people strong is pretty easy. In theory, I think it is. Like, just keep lifting heavier over time, but keeping clients
progressively overload.
Yeah, keeping clients though for a lifetime and changing their life. That's coaching. That takes a. It's not
that comes with a sense of variety, sense of a compass, especially not just with you, but with the people you are attempting to coach, is understanding what makes them tick and how they work and how you can relate to them and how you can translate things to make their process and progress more sustainable and enriching. So,
and like, this stuff is just a small part of a bigger picture. Like, it's pretty in depth, and we can keep, like, if you look at the cycles of the anaerobic, like the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, like, you'll fucking have it's boring. Like, no one needs to know that shit. Like, you can go deep as you want down these holes, but it's really a small portion in like what coaching really is. But I saw a lot of people were interested in endurance running and training, so knowing how your body works can be beneficial.
Also, knowing how to properly condition your body for that is huge. Because like you said, people just love to run themselves into the ground. It's like, cool, you got really good at running yourself into the ground, but that's not going to help you on your 13 miles that you're about to do.
Yep, because you're really good at going hard for 2 to 3 minutes, but then your aerobic system's trash. So that's the 16-12 program. We have conditioning on our lifting days, and some of them will kick your ass, but we have more aerobic days to help build. Like, there's strategy involved with it, but you're right, Sean. Like, that, most people, but that stuff's more fun, right?
It is more fun, but if you have a goal, you need to do things that actually work towards that.
Right.
Yep. Or say that you don't actually have that goal, and that's fine. If you just want to kick your own ass.
Yeah, and if your goal is to complete like a half or a full or a 50K or even 100K, like, you're doing low intensity, just trekking miles, man. That's all that is. And Matt talks about it all the time. Just getting my miles in, just getting on the bike, just getting my miles in, just getting my miles in. Because him building that tank is what allows him to do all the things he wants to do. And like, I even look at Matt, I'm like, how the fuck does he even do all this stuff? And it's because his gas tank is so big. Like, you have to look at not energy just for training, but it's his energy to give to multiple companies, multiple people, traveling, like taking on all these projects. Like, he better be able to recover. Well, he better have a high, like, aerobic base. He better have a high aerobic capacity, because you need energy for that shit too. Right. So we talk about, if we want to do more, we need the energy, because energy fatigue is the limit when it comes to our endurance. And it doesn't have to be just endurance training, but like life, your endurance for life, to keep up with my kid, my wife, my dogs, like opening a business, and then all my clients in my current business. Like, damn, dude, like, that takes energy. And that's another reason to train. I mean, I'm glad we kind of brought that up. Like, that's another reason to train your aerobic system, so you can recover. So you can do more and you can handle more. And just look at how long Matt's been doing this. And look at
That's
the
like
lifters
20 years at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's overnight success. Cool. That's the biggest takeaway. Train your, improve, make your aerobic base really, 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 really big, and then you'll be able to do everything in the world that you want. About energy, fatigue. You guys got anything else for me? Appreciate you being here tonight.
Yeah, man. Thank you for the lesson. I like that.
Cool. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them in the Discord. And then next week we'll do breathing and how we can use it to shift our state from fight or flight to rest and digest. So if you guys don't have anything else, I will see you and talk to you next week.
Okay, got man. Thank you.
There, guys.
Later, bro. Appreciate you.
Thanks. Appreciate you all.